I am Eileen Doherty, and I'm the director of the Colorado Gerontological Society. And I would like to welcome you to our presentation this afternoon. I expect that there will be more people joining us. We had about 50 people who had pre-registered, so I'm assuming that they will be joining us shortly. This is the third session in a series that we have been doing we wanted to share a little bit with you about some issues associated with downsizing to a smaller home. There's lots of issues that go into that. What we're going to focus on a lot today is actually the whole issue of what happens if you are a seller and or a buyer. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and share the screen, and we will get started. So let's see here. I think I did this wrong. Hold on. Okay. Let me know if you can't see the screen, otherwise I'm going to go ahead. So downsizing to a smaller home is brought to you this afternoon by the Colorado Gerontological Society. We're going to start out initially talking about you being the seller, but a lot of this also is applicable if you are the buyer. So if you are looking basically to sell your house or to buy a new one, one of the very first things that you will need to do is need to look at engaging a realtor. Most people do not have the skill set or the interest in doing what's called for sale by owner. So usually we seek the services of a licensed real estate agent. You can check an individual's license through the Colorado Department of Regulatory Agencies. And one of the things that happens with a real estate broker is that they are empowered, if you will, to practice a certain level of law. So you enter into a legal contract when you are working with a realtor. The realtor is not trained as an attorney. They are trained to advise you to get the advice of an attorney. And they are allowed to use what's called a pre-printed contract, meaning that they can fill in the blanks with the information like date, the amount of commission, the legal description of your property, and stuff like that. When you are selecting a realtor, one of the things that you probably want to do is to see if you can identify somebody who's specializing in the area where you live. Most likely, if you have that specialization, this individual will then know that market. He or she will know what the pricing is, who moves into that market or into that area, how they will get the word out that your property is being listed for sale. Most realtors use something called the multi-list, which is a service offered through the Board of Realtors. And that means that they will list your property on the multi-list, giving access to then people who are representing buyers to information about your particular property. In addition to that, usually they will do signage in your yard to let people in the neighborhood know that this property is for sale. They also oftentimes will distribute flyers. They may host open houses. So there's a variety of strategies, if you will, that a realtor will use when listing your property. The realtor is, the expectations then are that they will bring you an offer that meets the terms that you have outlined in this listing contract. If they are the sellers, but a realtor, then they represent the seller. If they are the buyer's realtor, then they are representing the buyer. Most of the time, there are two realtors involved in a transaction. You can also have a realtor who is a broker, who is licensed with the Colorado Board of Realtors to be able to not only do the listing, but also to do the closing. And then you will have agents who work under the supervision and jurisdiction of a broker. As the listing agent, the seller's agent is required to have a duty to sell. Their job is to get you the best price, to advertise it, and to represent you in this transaction. The buyer's agent, on the other hand, their duty is to the buyer, and their duty is to get the lowest price for the value of the home that the buyer is looking to purchase. So sometimes there is significant negotiation between the buyer's realtor and the seller's realtor on your behalf, depending on whether you're the buyer or the seller. They are not allowed to make any offers that you do not ask for or that you do not approve. So they are representing your interests. Both the seller and the buyer do get a commission. The commission on average at this point in time in the Denver area and Colorado is about 5.5% of the sale price. The listing agreement will indicate how much that commission is, and usually in recent years it is being split about half and half, although sometimes you will also see about a 60-40 split. Again, that is negotiated between the realtors in terms of how much each side will get. The commission is usually part of the purchase price, and it is paid at closing. So as part of the closing, then there is a check that is also cut for the realtors in terms of their commissions. When you're selling and pricing your home, there's a number of things that go into determining the value of this home. So one of them is a market analysis, and you can get information about this relatively easily. One thing is to look at the county assessor's valuation. Oftentimes the county actually has your home valued lower than what some of the market comps will look at. So there are a couple of online tools that you can use. One is Zillow.com, and that's a national database. The other is Realtor.com. And those will give you ball price figures, if you will, of what they believe your home is worth. In addition to kind of doing this market analysis as you're working with your realtor, one of the things you will want to do is price your home. And that pricing basically is done through this market analysis, looking at what other homes in the area are selling for. They're going to look at things like, how big is your house? How many bedrooms and baths do you have? Do you have a single, double, or triple garage? You have a finished or unfinished basement. How big is the lot? Oftentimes the end lot, especially if you're in an area where they're looking to development. A corner lot has more value than a lot in the middle of the street. The other thing is that it is all about, in terms of determining this price, really what the market is like in your area. So where I live, which is in East Denver in Mayfair, the prices are very high. And most of the purchase at this point in time is for the lot, and they really are not looking to save the home. They're looking to scrape the home and build a new one. Other things that can determine the price is the condition of the home. So is it a home that needs fixing, or is it a home that there's been some work done and it's ready to move in? Sometimes we recommend that if a home needs fixing, that you may want to just take a discounted price, take $10,000 or $15,000 less, and reduce your workload. Sometimes the benefit of doing the upgrades is worth the increased price, and sometimes it's not. As I said a few minutes ago, a real estate broker is empowered to enter into legal contracts. There are two primary contracts that will be involved in the sale of your home. So one of them is a listing contract, and this is the document basically that says you are putting your house on the market for X amount of money. It also lists what you are going to be including in that sale. So if you're including a sprinkler system, if you're including a satellite dish, if you're including the drapery in the house, those kinds of things get listed. It also basically indicates to the buyer that you have the right to sell the property to the best of your knowledge. It indicates that you have access to what's called merchantable title, that it is in fact your property and you have the right to sell it. It is the listing contract then that is used by the realtor to list your property on the multi-list, to put out signage, do open houses, or whatever. When a buyer comes to the table, if you will, and is interested in your property, then their realtor will prepare something called a purchase contract. And they then are representing the buyer, and they indicate that they have an interest in purchasing the property. Sometimes you will get a purchase contract in which whatever the terms are that you have identified, the buyer will accept all of those. It's more frequent, though, to see a purchase contract in which there are some contingencies. And those contingencies can vary. Sometimes it's subject to various types of inspections, including an inspection where the potential buyer reserves the right to walk through the property. Could have some contingencies around radon, could have some contingencies around mechanical or systems inspections, but usually there are some contingencies. Sometimes it'll also be contingent upon the buyer being able to sell the home that they're currently living in, or it might have a contingency that says that if they don't get the loan that they are applying for. In today's market, oftentimes the loan is pre-approved, but that does not necessarily mean that the lender will give them the money for the property that they are currently putting in a purchase contract. Usually with a purchase contract also comes something called earnest money. The earnest money gives a deposit by the buyer to the purchaser. And basically when you accept the earnest money, you have agreed to take the property off the market while the terms of the purchase contract are being executed. So while the inspections are going on, while the loan applications are being processed and approved, then you have agreed to take it off the market. And the compensation for that then is the earnest money. If the buyer is approved, then the earnest money usually goes toward the purchase price as part of the overall price. If for some reason or other the purchase contract is not executed, then usually there's a forfeiture of the earnest money, and that is your compensation for keeping it off the market. There are some disclosures that are required in the purchase at the time of the purchase and the listing. And one of them is what's called a common interest community. So are there any kind of covenants, homeowners associations, special taxing districts, any of those kinds of things? A second one that is not required, but sometimes you will see, is whether there's any type of energy efficiency features that have been added to the home. A requirement if the home was built before 1978 is a disclosure that the house may contain some lead-based paint. In addition to that, if you are in an area where there are oil and gas leases or any other city or county approvals or restrictions for oil and gas, those have to be disclosed, as well as any pumping wells at that point in time. If you are not 100% in agreement with the proposal that the buyer gives you as the seller, you can do what's called a counter proposal, and the buyer can either reject or accept the changes or amendments. So say, for example, that you listed your house for $500,000 and the buyer came in and wanted to only give you $400,000, and you believe that you still want more than 400 but not 500, you could counter with a $450,000 or some number counter proposal. The buyer's realtor then is obligated to give this counter proposal to the seller's realtor, and then the seller's realtor is required to give it to you if you are representing the buyer, and vice versa. The next step in this is, say you have agreed to the terms in the contract, is accepting the offer. That means that both sides, both parties, the buyer and the seller, are in agreement that what's in the contract at this point in time, this is the purchase contract, not the listing contract, that you are in agreement with those terms and you have agreed to go forward to buy and sell the home. Other disclosures that are required are if there's any potable water. They're using well water or water providers. So if you live in the city and county of Denver, then Denver Water Department is the provider of your water. Sometimes there's also a property disclosure form, and this is two requirements. One is if the property has ever been used for meth, that has to be disclosed. And if there are any transportation projects that may either increase the value or decrease the value of your property. There may be noise issues that you're aware of. Transportation is a big thing because sometimes the property is also subject to eminent domain. And what that means is that the city or the transportation authority or the state can basically declare your property as for demolition, and then they can either pay you what they consider to be a fair price, or they can just take it. So once you have this contract as the seller, if there are things that you have agreed to, then it is your responsibility to do your due diligence to meet those requirements. So you may have agreed to a new roof, new carpet, paint, whatever. You may have agreed to inspections. So usually the buyer is the one that requests these, and they will engage those professionals, if you will, to conduct those inspections. Most of the time, it's my experience that repairs that have to be made are usually done at the seller's expense, and unless they were disclosed at the time of the putting it on the market as part of the listing contract. So if you disclose, for example, that you know that you need a new roof, or that the furnace is 30 years old and you're not planning to replace it, then unless you agree to it in a counter proposal, you would not have to replace it. You will want, if you are the buyer, to make sure that the seller, usually it's the responsibility of the seller, but it doesn't have to be, but one party or the other should in fact get title insurance. And the purpose for title insurance is to make sure that there aren't any liens on the property, whether there's a mortgage, a mechanic's lien, whether somewhere along the line 200 years ago somebody owned the property, it wasn't homesteaded properly or something, and somebody else can make a claim to this property. That is what we call being able to give merchantable title, meaning that once you have the title insurance, they've searched the records back to when the property was originally put into service, and they find that you legally own it, and there aren't any titles, anybody that has any liens against it. The reason then for the title insurance is that guarantees that if something comes back at some point in time, that the title insurance will in fact cover whatever is needed to solve that. Other things in terms of the contract is making sure that the buyer has the money to, or the ability to secure the loan. Once all of those pieces of the contract have been completed by the buyer and the seller within the agreed upon time frame, then we have something called the closing. The closing is usually done by a title company, and it does things like completes the purchase agreement. So it will identify which costs are the responsibility of the seller, which costs are the responsibility of the buyer, and those again usually are agreed upon as part of the contract for purchase. So there's no hard and fast rules about who has to pay for what. That is definitely an agreement between the two parties. It also finalizes the date of possession and when the keys will be transferred. So some people will ask for immediate possession, meaning that when they walk out of the closing, they have the keys in hand and they plan to go in and do whatever they are going to do with the property. Sometimes the date of possession is a week later, 2 weeks later, whatever. There's a deed of trust that is executed by the title company, and basically this conveys or gives your interest in the property as the seller to the buyer. So it says that with this document, I give you my interest to this property and it is now yours. Another thing that happens in the closing is the terms of the payment. So is the buyer going to be getting the new loan? And are they bringing cash to the table? Are they bringing only a check from the lender? So how are you going to get paid? And the title company takes care of that. In addition to that, the title company usually takes care of recording the sale with the clerk and recorder in the county in which the property is located. So basically they transfer the title from you as the seller to the buyer. Another thing that the title company will prepare is a deed. You prefer and you want, and I advise you in this kind of a situation, to insist on a general warranty deed. The general warranty deed indicates how much was paid for the property and how the buyer will take title to that property. So again, this warrants to the buyer that they have the ability to sell the property and that it is being sold to them under the terms and conditions that we have agreed upon. The deed should also be recorded at the clerk and recorder, because that gives the legal paperwork trail to show who in fact owns that property. Sometimes we do see that property is transferred via a quitclaim deed, and it is a valid transfer of property, but a quitclaim deed does not require the title search, so it doesn't always have the same protections. A promissory note. So another thing that gets executed is the closing, is that if the buyer is not bringing 100% cash to the table, usually in the form of a cashier's check, but they are borrowing money, then a promissory note is executed by the buyer to whoever the lender is. That promissory note, as the seller, is really none of your business. It's only the business of the buyer, but it outlines the amount of the loan, the interest rate, the dates in which payments are due, and when there can be a foreclosure. Sometimes you will see a situation where the seller agrees to carry the promissory note. If in fact that is the case, if you decide as the seller you want to do that, I also recommend that you record the promissory note at the clerk and recorder. And again, this defines the terms, if you will, of when the payment is, what the interest rate is, what the payment due dates are, and it also tells you what your rights are in terms of a foreclosure if there's a default on the loan, and how you can take back possession. A bill of sale is a document that is usually executed if there are certain things, certain pieces on the property that go with the sale. So if there are solar panels, if there's a water softener, if you're selling the appliances, the window coverings, curtain rods, fireplace inserts, those kinds of things are included in the bill of sale, basically indicating that those items were part of the purchase, and now that the title has been conveyed and the deeds have been signed, that those also now belong to the buyer. You can also, in the bill of sale, have the inclusions of personal property, such as furniture, household items, patio furniture, anything like that, that would be included if you are selling that as well. So this concludes the section of the presentation in which we're actually looking at the overview of how to be a buyer and a seller. So now, if you are the buyer or the seller or a renter, there's some other things as you move into your new neighborhood that you may want to consider. So the very first and probably most important thing is to pick a neighborhood. Are you going to be staying in the same area of town, the state, or the country where you currently live, or are you moving to a whole new area? Other considerations which realtors can usually help you identify is what kind of access do you have to services, such as medical and physician services, where's the grocery store, what kind of retail commerce is in your area, things like pharmacy. What about transportation, if you're going to be dependent on public transportation? Are there any places of worship nearby? If you own a car, what are the parking restrictions or requirements? Other things that you may want to look at in terms of the neighborhood is what are the cultural or community activities that you might be interested in. Is it a neighborhood where there are young families, or is it a senior community? Is it a multi-generational household or neighborhood? Another really big decision that you have to make as part of all of this is, are you going to buy or are you going to rent? Other things that you want to look at is, are you doing a condo? Are you doing a townhome? Are you doing a retirement community? Or are you doing long-term care with an assisted living or a nursing home? If you're doing the assisted living nursing home, you are definitely 100% in the rental market. If you are doing a retirement community, you do have the option on some of them to do a purchase, and some of them you are doing a rental agreement. Similarly, if you're doing a condo or a townhome, you may rent or you may purchase. Other things that you need to look at in terms of your own preferences are, is it in an established neighborhood with trees and wide streets, or is it in a newer neighborhood that is just being developed? What are your personal preferences? What's your comfort zone? Other things to take into consideration are things like highways, factories, airports. Are you in the city center, or are you in the urban area? Are you in a suburb? One of the things that sometimes I warn people about, if they're specifically here in Denver, is how close are you to I-25 or I-70? Other things that you need to consider as you are looking at a new home is, what are the features that are important to you, not just now as you are making the move, but if your health or physical conditions should deteriorate, what else do you need to take into consideration? So one of the really big things is accessibility of appliances and cabinets in the kitchen. So for example, in my house, I have custom built kitchens, and the second shelf is a shelf that is at this moment very high. So if I want to get something off of the second shelf that is in the back, I have to get on a stool. If I'm 88 years old, getting on a stool may or may not be the most judicious thing that I might decide to engage in. Bathrooms, look at the bathroom in terms of ADA accessibility. If you had to use a walker or a wheelchair, could you get into the bathroom? How wide are the doors in the building? Are they the standard 30-inch? Are they oversized? There is something now that is being put into lots of new construction called universal design. And a lot of the ADA accommodation stuff is being built into the initial architecture of the building, but many older buildings or buildings that have been around for a while do not have that feature. Other things to look at are things like ramps or steps into the garage and into on the front and back porch. Steps are not friendly to walkers. They're not too bad for canes, but they're not friendly at all for walkers and wheelchairs. And if you are looking at stairs or ramps or stairs and had to put in a ramp, what are the existing requirements for the city zoning to be able to put in a ramp? So for example, in the city and county of Denver, if you put in a ramp, you can drop 1 inch for every foot of height. So if I have a 24-inch set of steps into my building, I have to put in a ramp that is 24 feet long. And if I'm putting that in, can it go directly from the street into my house, or does it have to wrap? And if I am living in a covenant village, does that association allow for a 24-inch or 24-foot ramp? And what are the requirements for that? Some of that is covered under the ADA, and the homeowners association and various groups have to allow it, but some of them do not. Other features that you may want to look at are things like covered porches and stairs. And a really, really big one is storage. How many closets and storage rooms, utility rooms do you have, and what is the potential for adding storage? So if you buy a smaller home, if you're going to do that, a single level, ground level home is preferable. The goal always here is to get all of the laundry and the storage and other features of the home into the main level, that there be no stairs, to reduce basically the risk of falls or whatever. Usually if you buy a ground level home, things like the furnace and the air conditioner are also on the ground level. And that again is very important to maintaining independence, because when you have to change filters and do other kinds of maintenance, if you're doing it yourself, then you have easy access to it. You may also want to think about making your home a smart home as you are moving to a new situation. And this is basically where you can control a lot of the devices from your smartphone. So controlling things like the garage door, turning on and off lights, doorbells so you can see who's at your front door, adjusting the temperature of your air conditioner or your furnace, any of those kinds of features, and there are a lot more as well. Another thing to look at is, as you are buying a smaller home, is if you do a townhome or a condo, that reduces usually the yard work to very minimal or none. If you are a buyer, you need to do additional things. You do need to figure out if you have to take out a new mortgage, if you've sold your previous home, or do you have the funds to pay cash, and do you want to tie up all of your cash in the equity of your home? You will need to look at what the interest rates are, because that will drive your monthly payment. And then if you do have to do any financing, you will have to look for a lender. Right now, there seems to be plenty of money in the market, but that isn't always true. So 2 or 3 or 5 years from now, if you are looking to sell, we may not have that quite ready access to cash. Usually getting a loan is easier if you have an established relationship with the bank. The other thing that you will want to look at as part of this is, what would your monthly payment be? Even if you can't get exact, if you can get within 10%, if you're looking to decide whether you want to be a buyer as opposed to a renter, that at least gives you some ballpark of the amount of cash flow that you need on a monthly basis. Most of the time, your monthly payment, if you are going through a lender, is going to include payment back of the principal. This is the actual amount of money that you borrowed. The interest rate, right now, interest rates are relatively low. So you might be able to get a 2 or 3% loan, which the higher the interest, the more the monthly payment is usually. The other thing to look at in terms of the loan is how many years is it amortized. So is it amortized over 10 years, over 15 years, over 30 years, or over 40 years? Because the length of the amortization also then will determine how much of the principal, in terms of the payment that is made each month, goes toward principal and how much goes toward interest. Other items that are usually included in the monthly payment is the real estate taxes. If you are eligible for the senior homestead exemption, that will not transfer to the new home. You have to live in the new home for 10 years before you will be able to take advantage of that exemption under the current statute. There's usually some type of building insurance. This is the insurance that basically pays for any damages to the property. So this includes the physical structure. It does not include any damages to the dirt. So you insure for things like hail damage, water damage, broken windows, theft, stuff like that in your homeowner's policy. And depending on your credit and how much money you have in the bank and some other factors, the lender may also require that you have mortgage insurance. And what the mortgage insurance does is it pays for any defaults, if you will, on the mortgage. There are some federal rules that say that if you own more than a certain percentage of the equity in the home, you do not have to have mortgage insurance. So even if you are a current homeowner and you are being charged mortgage insurance, check the federal rule to see if you need to continue it. It's not a lot of money, but it's $35 or $40 that you may be able to stop paying on a monthly basis. The reverse mortgage is an option that some people do and can use when they are a new buyer. So you may be able to qualify for either a reverse mortgage outright, or you may have to do a new loan and then refinance a second time with a reverse mortgage. What a reverse mortgage basically does is you do not make a monthly payment on the home until you are no longer entitled to it. And basically the payments then are made by the reverse mortgage. When you sell, then the reverse mortgage is paid off, and you then are basically using your equity to pay that outstanding loan. If you decide that you are going to rent, you will calculate the month of the cost of the rent, and it's good to do some kind of projections about rental costs into the future. I would say at a minimum, you would want to figure annual increases in your rent of somewhere between 5 and 10%. Not that that's a magic number, but if you're renting a home for $1,000 a month, you might want to figure that over 10 years, you would have a 10% increase in rent each month. And say in 10 to 15 years, you might be paying as much as $2,000 a month. Or, well, you wouldn't be paying quite that much. You will also want, if you've been a homeowner for many, many years, going into the rental market, there are approved leases, if you will, through the Colorado Board of Realtors again. Those are available through a couple of different sources online. You can also have your attorney draw up a lease for you, or the owner of the property may have a standard lease that they use. The terms, if you will, of the lease that you need to look at is not just how much is the rent, but you'll also want to look at things like the deposit, under what terms and condition is the deposit refundable, how long is the lease, is it a 1-year lease, a 2-year lease? If you are under a 1-year lease, the terms for eviction look very different than if you are in a month-to-month lease. And some of that has recently been changed by the state legislature as well. You will also want to look for clauses in the lease as to whether or not the owner could evict you if they want to sell the property, or what the terms are in terms of change of ownership. Sometimes, especially if you are in an apartment building, what I have seen over the years is while the lease will protect you in terms of the new buyer has to buy out the leases, but then a month or two after they own the building, then they can change the terms of the lease. So sometimes that is a risk that happens. You also will want to look at the lease to see who is responsible for things like repairs, paint, carpet, laundry facilities, etc. And most of the time, it's good to do some kind of a move-in, move-out checklist, because here is when you have the opportunity then to say, for example, the light plate switch is broken, the light in the living room does not work, there was a broken pane on the right picture window. That's the kind of stuff that goes in this checklist. And the benefit of that is at move-in, you have that list of what was identified. And then at move-out, you do a follow-up, and then you should not be able to be charged for those damages that were part of the property prior to your moving in. As part of this whole downsizing and moving from a large 4-bedroom house that you've lived in for a very long time is an accumulation of stuff. Usually we have an emotional attachment to this memorabilia. We may have heirlooms, we may have personal hobbies, but basically we have kept all of this stuff because it has some meaning to us. And so now that we are in a downsizing frame of reference, we have to decide whether or not we can continue to keep this and what of that stuff we are going to keep. So for example, if I have a plate that my mother gave me when she went on a river cruise, is that meaningful enough to me that I want to keep it forever? Or is that an item that I would be willing to have a picture of? Or is that an item that one of my kids or other relatives would like to have? Other things that you need to look at is how much clothing will you need. Clothing takes up an incredible amount of room in a closet. And so the question becomes, how much do you wear? How often do you wear it? And do you really need 3 winter coats, or are you okay with 1? Other things to look at is furniture and wall decorations. If you are moving from a 4-bedroom home with high ceilings to a 2-bedroom condo with significantly smaller rooms, another thing to look at is the size of the furniture appropriate for your space. If you have an overstuffed recliner and you're moving into a living room that is 12 by 14, and this recliner takes up, more than 1/3 of the room, is that really appropriate, or do you need to look at getting a smaller recliner? Other things you will want to look at is things like extra dishes. How much entertaining are you going to be doing? How many appliances do you need? Do you really need a fry cooker and an electric skillet and a slow cooker and a roaster for the turkey and 2 coffee pots, one that has 30 cups? So those are the kinds of things you need to look at. Other things in terms of the furniture is, as I said earlier, does it really fit in the place where you're going? So if you're going to, say, 1,000 square foot ground level house or apartment, and you have a king size bed, and the bedroom is, say, 12 by 12, most likely your king size bed is not going to work. The other thing that's really important is how do you maximize the use of space? So if you've got a bed, can you have drawers underneath that you could use for storage space? Can you convert a closet into a shelving unit such that you can increase your storage space? Can you put 2 rods in your closet so that, say, your winter clothes can go in the top rod and it only comes down in the middle of the, or in the winter when you need it, and then you reverse it for your summer clothes. Extra stuff. The most important thing to remember about the extra stuff is that it is precious. It is precious stuff to you. It may not be precious to anyone else. So for example, I personally have a collection of Waterford china or crystal. I have bowls, and I have drinking glasses, and I have water glasses, and I have cream and sugars, and a ton of this stuff. Do any of my kids care? I don't know. I have a collection of silver. I have a collection of china. I have heirloom things that other people have given me. A colleague of mine or a friend of mine gave me her grandmother's china because none of her children wanted it. And now, because it's so beautiful, I don't even use it, although I should. Other things that people have is books, stamp collections, pictures, teacup collection, tools in the workshop. A friend of ours, when she moved a couple of years ago, there was so many tools that her husband had because he was a handyman, and she had to find homes for all of that stuff. You need to decide whether you have to make money by selling these items or will you donate them. If you decide you want to sell them, then you may have to hire somebody who can help with that. There are companies in town or in the state that specialize in helping with downsizing. They will sort and price and hold estate sales or whatever. You can sell stuff on things like Craigslist as well. Sometimes it's important when you're trying to figure out what to keep, having somebody impartial to help with that. And making some different piles as you make these decisions. So make a pile or an area that says, I'm keeping this. Another one that specifically says that you're going to give it to family, or you're going to try to give it to other people in your life who are special, what you're going to donate, and what you're going to trash. This is just a slide that reviews, if you will, some steps that was put out by one of the for-profit companies on a blog in terms of the different steps as you're looking to downsize. So in review, basically, you want to declutter. You want to figure out what you want to keep or what you want to give away, what you want to donate, how you want to document anything that you want to keep on pictures or whatever. You want to figure out what your storage capability is, what the size of the facility is, the amenities, what is memorabilia, what is extra. I'm working with somebody right now who has a lot of extra Christmas decorations, and he is struggling with it's his grandmother that he's working with, and as he describes it, she has a garage full of Christmas decorations. And then you really have the next step, which is the move itself. So you can do the move in two ways. You can either hire a moving company or you can do it yourself. As part of the moving company, then you will want to sign some kind of a contract. This really eliminates your having to do a lot of the heavy lifting or getting family to do it. You also have to negotiate with the moving company. Are they going to pack it, or will you have to pack it? Other considerations is what happens if something is broken or scratched or lost. You will want to make sure that they have some type of insurance against any kind of damages. You will want to make decisions around how you're going to transport personal items and who's going to move those. Really, in terms of hiring a moving company, there's a lot of pre-planning that needs to occur in terms of the logistics. Sometimes the moving companies, especially if you're moving to another state, they'll pack this big truck. So if your move-in date is July the 1st, they may actually need to pick up your stuff 2 or 3 weeks earlier so that they can get to their destination. And then another consideration is the cost. The other option is to do it yourself and to get your own labor or manpower. You may still need to rent a truck, and then there's all the associated costs around boxes and tape and who's going to do that moving and the dollies, etc. And then the last thing as part of this move is really adjusting to the new home. So you need to be prepared. You're going to mourn the loss of your home. You've lived there for an extended period of time, and you are going to experience some grief. You may be able to manage this grief and loss on your own, or you may want to talk to a social worker or a counselor. Change is also very, very hard. Learning all of the new routines, the new lifestyle, the new gadgets, where things are located, what works for you and what doesn't. All of this takes an incredible amount of energy. Your brain has to rewire itself. You know exactly what shelf the hand lotion was sitting on. You know exactly what shelf your white coat was on. All of those things will be upended and uprooted, and you will have to get used to these new routines. Most importantly is to remember that the stuff, whatever precious stuff it is that you have taken with you, this is what brings you comfort. It allows you to reminisce, to recreate, if you will, your sense of home. Other things that you can do is look for opportunities that you can become involved with in your new neighborhood or community. And the most important is do not depend on your children to be your constant companion. They may visit you once or twice a week, and even that becomes a lot for many families. So really, at the end of the day, when you move, even to be closer to family, all of these issues associated with adjusting to your new home and your new lifestyle is going to be incumbent upon you, because your family is not going to be as available as you might like. And this concludes our presentation at this moment.